The most recent VIP Developer Roundtable from Visionary Realms featured an interview with Justin Istuulamae Gerhart, the lead writer for their upcoming MMORPG Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. This was an hour and 20-minute interview packed with interesting lore, and honestly, one of the best roundtables they've done in my humble opinion. Even though I gave some highlights on our weekly podcast, The Rewind, I felt like it deserved a more thorough spotlight, and so did the community, as I got a few requests to make this video. So I'm going to give you a recap of the lore that was shared in that interview. I'll highlight what I believe is previously unknown information in quotes, so let's dive in. Pantheon Plus. First up, there was a lot of specific information about the 9 player races. For humans, we learned they are in a phase where they're kind of disinterested with Kingsreach, at least on the higher levels, and generally more interested in exploration. Justin described there being a bottleneck in terms of wealth and land ownership amongst the lords and ladies of Avendir's court. He added, they are the wealthiest race, and they've established a lot of trade routes with more access to the rest of the world. A little later in the interview, we learned that humans have one of the better, more dominant navies, but just about every race has seafarers. It was said there's a great port city, not Thronefast, and apparently this city has appeared in at least one piece of art. It's an international hub, and apparently plays a pretty big role. But this was left a little mysterious, so where this isn't exactly clear. Halflings were described as being a bit more local. Their focus is going to be firstly wraith hunting, but Justin noted different segments focused on different things. The Escaps, for example, are focused more on international things and more traditionally civilized. But unlike the human expansionist tendencies, halflings undertake adventure for the sake of it with a more carefree attitude. We got some insight into elven culture that we hadn't had before, specifically 2 different ways of approaching life and preservation of their ways. Justin reminded us that Ember Elves would rather seek evil where it sleeps. Interestingly, he also advised they're very focused on international things and some specific things outside of Kingsreach. So what are the Ember Elves interested in on the other continents, one wonders? As for the Ashen Elves, he said they would rather keep evil at bay. It's also noted that Splinterfolk, another faction of the Elves, more clearly align with the player, but hold a somewhat disreputable perception within Elven society. Also, in relation to the elves, we're given a bit of detail about the Torn Elves. Justin noted, part of becoming a Torn Elf is physically losing your sight, so Tordinir's sight is the way by which they see. It is a metaphysical sense that allows them to move throughout their area, to function in a different way. This is new information, I believe, so it's pretty cool to get some insight into that. With regard to ogres, we got some names we hadn't previously known. We knew the names of 4 of the 7 clans, that being the clans of the Way of Aster, Fangoon, Black Moon, and Dark Sun, but now we have the name of the last 3, which are the Garogian, Bloodmare, and Cult of the Severed Stone. We knew that each of the 7 clans used to be a city-state on Gorok, but we didn't know that each one has a deity associated with them. This was implied when Justin said that the Way of Aster, one of the clans, is overseen by a deity named Astergath. We also got a little insight into the Darkmere culture, specifically the social standing of Darkmere clerics. Justin shared, in most cultures, where you have a cleric, they're seen as the most virtuous good, the highest noble, etc. In Darkmere culture, it's so harmed and injured by its past, but also its continued bitterness and trauma. A cleric is a very different thing. An outsider, a traitor. A cleric pursues something that is not part of their interest. This healing, forgiveness, those things in a virtue and ideology sense are not something they want to be a part of. A Darkmere cleric is an outcast. A Darkmere cleric is rejected by the normal society. Justin also clarified there's a common misconception about the Darkmere in stating, in the lore, it says that Serenai gave them a lung. It does not say that she removed their ability to breathe underwater. Initially, they couldn't breathe underwater, but if you look at the recent Darkmere art, the monk, specifically, you can actually see there's gills in his neck. They still have the ability to go underwater, but it's something they've had to, over the last 100 years, to work and get better at. They still have racially based advantages that are not just ornamental, it's just harder for them, but still better than a human. Stepping back into the water, so to speak. For the enigmatic gnomes, we got a curious tidbit of lore. When asked if gnomes eat as other races do, we learned that they do have an energy source and they can eat organic matter. However, they also consume thin crystals, wafer-type things, as per Justin. They'll need this energy since they remain focused on learning and trying to get better understanding of the world. In groups, they're very interested in understanding the past of Terminus and its history. There hasn't been any mention of the gnomes' pantheon of deities in the lore to date, but Justin affirmed they're not agnostic by nature. He advised they have a unique relationship with their pantheon. Conversely, the Dwarven Pantheon is much more defined, but what are they up to? Justin suggested the dwarves are kind of quietly amassing power in a way, but looking to understand, a way they're trying to get to the tipping point where they're comfortable trying to understand what really happened in the Deicide War. Kazas is concerned, but also optimistic about what the future holds. And then there's also a thing going on trying to keep Amberfate quiet. So in potentially related news, it was revealed that Kazas' power level is on par with Tel Narsis, the snow dragon he confronted in A Night of Five Voices. It's noteworthy that Tel Narsis is not a Rainborn dragon and not a top tier dragon, according to Justin. As for the Archai, we got some detail about how their elemental attunement is determined. Justin noted that is one of the deities of the Archai. That is one area she's able to interact with them through this process. Not a direct interaction, more of a calling. So when they stand in front of the elements, they're basically just this child of energy wrapped in sand, and they're drawn to one of these elements. Which deity from the Aeronamar Pantheon might this be? That wasn't revealed, so we'll have to wait and see. In addition to the player races, we learned a few things about races that existed on Terminus prior to the arrival of the player races. We learned that the most prominent one is pronounced with a soft G, so Jinto rather than Ginto. Justin referenced the other races like the Tholen and the Gigana, which we know about, but he also mentioned the Iguidors. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't think we've heard about this race before, and of course now we must know more. Who are the Iguidors? We've already talked about the various deities a little bit, but practically speaking, we don't really know how you as a player are going to determine your deity. Justin gave us some insight into this with a heavy caveat that this isn't necessarily a design decision, just an idea behind deity selection. Here's what he said. Deity selection is probably not going to happen via traditional mechanics. Part of that is thinking through wanting to make it special. Also looking at the fact that we have a celestial boundary that is blocking direct access from the celestial realm to the mortal realm. Your gods do not interact with you in the same way they would in other games, so it felt very off to have that be something that was picked right up front. So we're moving beyond that and looking at having it be something you uncover in the world. We've tried to reimagine the process. This is pretty important and definitely interesting to see where this idea goes. And last, but certainly not least, Justin gave us a glimpse into some future lore. He said his focus at the time is on the continent of Kingsreach, but more specifically, the Silent Plains. We heard recently in the monthly VR dev stream that Silent Plains is under construction, so this makes a lot of sense. Here's the lore Justin shared about Silent Plains. When you see the zone, it may not be what you thought. The silence refers to the end of battle, hostilities, war. This time of lament that came afterwards. And when the lament was over, silence. It was a plain of battle where the Revenant take a couple footholds and ultimately lay siege to Havensong. When you go there, you will see vestiges of the battle and of the Revenant. Piece together some things visually that happened there. It's just saying that our soul has rested and is silent. As usual, Justin has a way of describing something in such a way that only a few lines of description can captivate the imagination. For this reason, I strongly recommend you go and listen to the entire Roundtable, because you can hear beyond the words that were spoken that the lore of Pantheon is in the hands of someone who lives in this world and cares deeply about it. And remember, you can pledge to support Pantheon's development at pantheonmmo.com. And until next time, cheers, and thanks for watching.